What happens when an entire galaxy underestimates the one species that refuses to abandon their own? When the great powers of the universe watch humanity flee in apparent defeat, they celebrate too early. Because somewhere in the ruins of what was once humanity's greatest stronghold, a single figure remains. Not a general, not a fleet commander, just one human with a rifle, infinite patience, and a promise to keep. The Corvani Empire thought they had won the day humanity retreated from Kepler Station. The Zelphiran hegemony believed they had finally broken the human spirit. The Rockthari clans were already dividing humanity's former territories among themselves. But none of them knew about Marcus Chen, the sniper who stayed behind when everyone else evacuated, the ghost in the machine who would teach 3 galactic superpowers why you should never count humanity out. This is the story of how one human's refusal to retreat turned a crushing defeat into the most legendary victory in galactic history. This is the story of the last shot that echoed across the stars and changed the fate of an entire war. The evacuation sirens have been silent for 3 days now, their final wailing cry still echoing in Marcus Chen's memory as he adjusted his position among the twisted metal beams of what had once been Kepler Station's primary communications tower. The structure groaned softly in the artificial atmosphere, a metallic lament for the thousands of humans who had called this place home just 72 hours ago. From his perch nearly 200 meters above the station's main plaza, Marcus had a perfect view of the 3-way occupation unfolding below. The Corvani Empire had claimed the eastern sectors, their crimson banners already hanging from the administrative buildings like bloody wounds against the sterile white walls. The Zelphiran hegemony had taken the western industrial complexes, their geometric silver standards positioned with mathematical precision throughout their claimed territory. The Rockthari clans, predictably, had seized the central markets and trade hubs, their bone totems scattered seemingly at random, but Marcus knew better. Every placement was strategic, marking territory in the ancient way of their people. He had been watching them for 3 days, learning their patterns, cataloging their weaknesses, and growing increasingly amazed at how quickly they had forgotten that humanity had built this station. They moved through the corridors and chambers as if they were exploring some ancient ruin rather than a facility that had been operational just days before. The arrogance was staggering. But Marcus had learned long ago that arrogance was humanity's greatest weapon against the galaxy's superpowers. The rifle nestled against his shoulder was nothing extraordinary by galactic standards, a standard human military sniper rifle with a smart scope and traditional projectile ammunition. The other races had moved on to energy weapons decades ago, dismissing kinetic rounds as primitive. Marcus smiled grimly at that particular piece of galactic wisdom. Sometimes primitive was exactly what you needed. Below, a Corvani patrol was making its 3rd round of the day through the residential sector. Marcus had timed them perfectly. They passed the same checkpoint every 4 hours and 12 minutes, with a variance of no more than 30 seconds. The squad leader was a typical Corvani officer, tall and lean with a distinctive ridge of bone across his forehead that marked him as nobility. He carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had never faced real opposition. Marcus lowered his eye to the scope and watched the alien stride past the memorial wall where hundreds of human families had once left messages for loved ones serving in the fleet. The Corvani's boots clicked against the metal grating with mechanical precision, each step a small desecration of what had been humanity's most successful deep space colony. 3 days ago, Admiral Sarah Morrison had made the call that saved 30,000 human lives and broke Marcus's heart simultaneously. The combined fleets of all 3 alien powers had arrived at Kepler Station with overwhelming force, demanding immediate surrender. The humans had fought valiantly for 6 hours before Morrison realized the mathematics were impossible. Kepler Station's defenses were formidable, but not against 3 separate fleets working in coordination. Evacuation Protocol 7. Morrison had announced over the station's communication system. All civilian and non-essential personnel to evacuation ships immediately. Military personnel will maintain defensive positions until civilian evacuation is complete. Marcus had been part of the final military evacuation wave, scheduled to leave on the last transport ship along with the remaining security forces. But, as he had stood in the departure bay, watching the last group of civilian families board their vessel, he had made a decision that went against every order he had ever received. He had simply walked away from the departure bay and hidden in the maintenance tunnels until the final ship left. The official record would show that Sergeant Marcus Chun had been killed in action during the defense of Kepler Station. His family would receive a flag and a medal. His commanding officer would write a letter expressing regret for the loss of a fine soldier. But Marcus was very much alive, and he had work to do. The Corvani patrol disappeared around a corner, and Marcus shifted his attention to the Zelfrin section. The hegemony operated differently than their allies, where the Corvani relied on regular patrols and visible presence. The Zelfrins preferred sensors and automated systems. They had set up a network of monitoring devices throughout their sector, creating overlapping fields of surveillance that would detect any significant movement. What they hadn't accounted for was that Marcus had helped install many of those same sensor systems when Kepler Station was being constructed. He knew their blind spots, their power sources, and most importantly, their maintenance schedules. The Zelfrins were efficient, but efficiency bred predictability, and predictability was something Marcus could exploit. A group of Rock 3 warriors was setting up some sort of ceremonial circle in what had been the station's central park. The area had once been filled with Earth-imported trees and flowering plants, a small piece of home for the human colonists. Now, it was being converted into a traditional Rock 3 challenge ground, complete with weapon racks and combat platforms. Marcus watched through his scope as the aliens arranged their primitive-looking weapons in ritual patterns. The irony wasn't lost on him. They were so focused on their ceremonies and traditions that they had failed to secure the most tactically important positions on the station. The communications tower where Marcus had made his nest was the highest point on Kepler Station, with clear sight lines to every major facility. In human hands, it would have been the first position fortified and the last abandoned. The aliens had barely looked at it. That oversight was going to cost them dearly. Marcus opened his personal log, speaking quietly into the recorder he had salvaged from his gear. Day 3 post-evacuation. Enemy forces have established themselves in predictable patterns. Corvani patrols maintain strict schedules, but poor situational awareness. Zelfrin surveillance is comprehensive, but relies too heavily on technology they don't fully understand. Rock 3 forces are focused on establishing territorial dominance through traditional means, leaving significant tactical vulnerabilities. He paused, watching a Corvani officer emerge from the administrative building that had once housed the station's governing council. The alien was carrying what appeared to be a human data pad, probably looted from one of the evacuated offices. The enemy has begun cataloging human technology and resources, Marcus continued. They're treating this as a standard occupation of a defeated position. They have no idea that the war is just beginning. The sun began to set through the station's transparent aluminum viewing ports, casting long shadows across the plaza below. Marcus had positioned himself to take advantage of the changing light patterns. As the shadows lengthened, they would provide additional concealment for what he had planned. He had spent 3 days observing, learning, and preparing. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Marcus Chun had never been the best sniper in the human military, but he had always been the most patient. While his colleagues focused on making the longest shots or the most difficult angles, Marcus had developed a reputation for waiting. He could lie motionless for days, if necessary, studying his targets, learning their habits, finding the perfect moment to strike. The aliens below had no idea they were being watched. They moved through their newly conquered territory with the casual confidence of victors, making plans for the long-term occupation of human space. They were already discussing how to divide humanity's remaining colonies, how to incorporate human technology into their own fleets, and how to ensure that humanity never again posed a threat to galactic stability. Marcus smiled coldly as he listened to their communications through the taps he had placed on their networks. Let them make their plans. Let them divide up humanity's empire on paper. Let them congratulate themselves on their swift and decisive victory. Because in a few hours, when the first shift change began and the aliens settled into their comfortable routines, Marcus Chun was going to remind the galaxy why humanity had never been conquered, only temporarily inconvenienced. The last light of day faded from the station's viewports, and Marcus began his final preparations. He checked his rifle one more time, confirmed his ammunition count, and reviewed the target list he had been compiling for 3 days. Each shot would be calculated not just for its immediate tactical impact, but for its psychological effect on the occupying forces. Marcus had studied military history extensively, and he knew that successful guerrilla warfare was as much about breaking enemy morale as it was about inflicting casualties. The aliens expected to face human fleets, human armies, human technology. They weren't prepared for a single human with infinite patience, and nothing left to lose. Outside, the three alien powers continued their occupation, unaware that humanity's real response was about to begin. They had claimed Kepler Station, but they hadn't won it. Not yet. Marcus settled into his position for the long night ahead, his finger resting lightly on the trigger of his rifle. Tomorrow, the galaxy would learn an important lesson about humanity. They never really retreat, they just advance in a different direction. And sometimes that direction was through a sniper scope. The first shot came at exactly 0347 hour station time, when the Corvani Night Patrol was at its furthest point from their communication relay. Marcus had waited through the long night, tracking the movement patterns of all three alien forces, until he found the perfect moment when maximum confusion would result from minimum action. Commander THYSS of the Corvani 1st Expeditionary Force never knew what hit him. One moment, he was reviewing territorial expansion plans on his portable command console. The next, his second-in-command was screaming orders as their leader collapsed with a neat hole through his cranial ridge. The projectile had traveled nearly 400 meters, passing through 2 separate sections of the station before finding its mark. Marcus didn't waste time admiring his handiwork. Before the Corvani could even begin to react, he was already moving through the maintenance shafts he had mapped during his 3 days of observation. The rifle came apart in his hands with practiced efficiency, barrel, stock, and scope separated and tucked into different compartments of his improvised gear. By the time the aliens started looking for sniper positions, Marcus was already 2 levels away and still moving. The reaction was everything he had hoped for and more. The Corvani immediately assumed they were under attack by a human strike force that had somehow infiltrated the station. Emergency protocols activated across their sector, with patrols doubling and all personnel ordered to combat readiness. The beautiful thing was that their emergency response completely ignored the other 2 alien powers, who suddenly found themselves facing what appeared to be a significant military buildup right next to their own territory. Marcus reached his secondary observation post in the old hydroponics lab, just in time to watch the Zelthran hegemony respond to the sudden increase in Corvani military activity. Their automated defense systems came online, and their own patrols began taking defensive positions. Within 20 minutes of Marcus's single shot, 2 of the 3 occupying powers were in a state of barely controlled tension. The Rock 3, predictably, assumed that one of their allies was making a play for increased territory and began mobilizing their own warriors in response. Marcus watched through a cracked observation port as bone-clad fighters took positions throughout the central market area, their primitive-looking weapons trained toward both Corvani and Zelthran sectors. It was beautiful chaos, and Marcus was just getting started. He reassembled his rifle in the shadows of the hydroponic tanks, careful to remain below the sight lines of the Zelthran sensors he knew were positioned at regular intervals throughout this section. The plants the human colonists had once tended were beginning to wilt without proper care, another small casualty of the alien occupation that added fuel to the cold fire burning in Marcus's chest. The second shot came 47 minutes later from a completely different position and, with a completely different target. Marcus had moved through the air filtration system to reach the old stellar cartography lab, where he had a perfect angle on the Zelthran communication array. Supervisor Zeth Prime of the Hegemony's technical division was attempting to coordinate a response to the Corvani military buildup when Marcus's bullet found the power coupling for their primary communication relay. The shot itself wasn't lethal. Marcus wasn't interested in killing random technicians. Instead, it was precisely calculated to disable the Zelthran's ability to coordinate with their fleet while making it appear that the power coupling had failed due to sabotage. The results were immediate and spectacular. The Zelthrans, already paranoid about Corvani intentions, interpreted the communication failure as evidence of electronic warfare. Their response was to activate every defensive system they had, including several that the humans who built Kepler Station hadn't even known existed. Apparently, the Hegemony had been much busier during their first few days of occupation than anyone had realized. Marcus watched in fascination as previously hidden weapon turrets emerged from walls throughout the Zelthran sector. The aliens had been retrofitting human architecture with their own military hardware, turning the residential areas into a fortress complex. It was an impressive achievement that would have taken weeks to complete, which meant they had been planning this occupation for far longer than anyone had suspected. That intelligence alone made Marcus's mission worthwhile, but he wasn't finished collecting information. The weapon turrets were now tracking toward Corvani positions, their targeting systems painting everything in the administrative sector with active scanning beams. The Corvani response was immediate and aggressive. Their own concealed weapons came online, revealing that they too had been fortifying their positions. Within an hour of Marcus's first shot, Kepler Station had been transformed from a peaceful occupation into an armed standoff between two galactic powers. The Rockthuri, caught between their increasingly hostile allies, began demanding explanations that neither the Corvani nor the Zelthrans were prepared to give. Marcus moved again, this time making his way to the central hub where the three territorial zones met. He had identified a perfect position in the old children's play area, a location that had clear sight lines to all three sectors, but was so emotionally significant that none of the alien powers had wanted to establish a military presence there. It was the kind of oversight that revealed everything about their psychology. The third shot was the most important, and Marcus took his time setting it up. He needed to hit something in the Rockthuri sector, but it had to appear to come from one of their allies. The angle had to be perfect, the trajectory unmistakable. The Rockthuri were a warrior culture. They would respond to betrayal with immediate and overwhelming violence. War Leader Croth was overseeing the construction of a challenge platform when Marcus's bullet took him through the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the ceremonial weapon display his warriors had been arranging. The shot appeared to come from the direction of the Corvani administrative sector, and the trajectory would be easy for any Rockthuri tracker to follow. The response was everything Marcus had hoped for. Within minutes, Rockthuri war horns were echoing through the station as the clans mobilized for combat. Ancient battle cries that had once struck fear into the hearts of civilized worlds now reverberated through the corridors of humanity's former home. Marcus didn't stay to watch the inevitable result. He was already moving through the maintenance tunnels toward his final position for this phase of the operation. Behind him, the station erupted into three-way chaos as the occupation force tore itself apart. The Corvani assumed they were under attack by both their allies and hidden human forces. The Zelthrans believed the Corvani were making a play for total control of the station while using human saboteurs as cover. The Rockthuri were convinced that their allies had betrayed them and were responding in the traditional way, with immediate and overwhelming violence. By the time Marcus reached his new position in the old observation deck, the first actual exchange of fire had begun between Corvani and Rockthuri forces. The Zelthrans were still trying to determine what was happening, but their automated defense systems were already engaging targets that approached their perimeter. Marcus assembled his rifle one more time and settled in to watch the show. Three of the galaxy's most powerful military forces were fighting each other in the hallways and chambers where human families had once lived and worked. It was poetic justice on a scale that even Marcus hadn't dared to hope for. But this was only the beginning. The aliens would eventually figure out what was happening, probably within the next few hours. They would establish better communication protocols, coordinate their responses, and begin a systematic search for the hidden human operative who had orchestrated their mutual destruction. Marcus was counting on it, because when they came looking for him, they would find something that none of them were prepared for, a human being who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. He spoke quietly into his personal recorder as energy weapons fire lit up the plaza below. Day 4, 0500 hours. Enemy forces have engaged each other across all sectors. Estimated casualties: 12 Corvani, 7 Zelthrans, 15 Rockthry. Station infrastructure damage minimal, but tactical situation has shifted dramatically in humanity's favor. A Corvani squad ran past beneath his position, their weapons trained on shadows that might or might not contain enemy forces. They were scared, Marcus realized with satisfaction. For the first time since the invasion began, the aliens were afraid. Personal note: Marcus continued, watching a group of Zelthran technicians attempt to repair their damaged communication array while Rockthry war cries echoed from the central plaza. Admiral Morrison was right to evacuate when she did. But she was wrong about one thing: the war isn't over. It's just beginning. Marcus carefully cleaned his rifle and began planning his next series of strikes. The aliens would adapt to this new reality, but adaptation took time, and time was something Marcus could use against them. Every hour they spent fighting each other was an hour they weren't consolidating their hold on human territory. More importantly, every shot Marcus fired was being recorded by the station's internal monitoring systems. The data would eventually make its way back to human intelligence, showing them exactly how to exploit the weaknesses and divisions between the three alien powers. The galaxy might have dismissed humanity as a spent force, but Marcus Chun was about to remind them why that was a mistake. Outside, the battle continued to rage through corridors that had once echoed with human laughter and conversation. The aliens were fighting for control of a prize that was slipping through their fingers with every shot fired in anger. Marcus smiled grimly as he planned his next move. The retreat from Kepler Station had indeed been complete, with one notable exception. And that exception was about to teach the galaxy a lesson they would never forget. By the end of the second day of fighting, the three alien powers had finally managed to establish a temporary ceasefire and coordinate their search efforts. Marcus watched from his latest position in the Atmosphere Processing Center as joint patrols began moving through the station with systematic efficiency. They had learned from their initial chaos, and the learning process was impressive to observe. Commander Vex of the Corvani Intelligence Division had taken charge of the investigation, working alongside Analytical Unit Zaith-7 of the Zelthran Technical Corps and Huntmaster Gorth of the Rockthry Tracker clans. The alliance was fragile and born of necessity, but it was effective. Within 6 hours, they had identified the approximate positions from which the sniper attacks had originated and begun mapping possible movement patterns through the station's infrastructure. Marcus had anticipated this development. In fact, he had been counting on it. The aliens were about to discover that hunting a human on a human-built station was very different from hunting anything they had encountered before. He had spent the previous night rigging what he privately called educational devices throughout the maintenance areas most likely to be searched. The aliens expected to find a hidden sniper. What they found instead was a crash course in human ingenuity. The first search team to enter Maintenance Section C-7 discovered that someone had rewired the lighting systems to create a strobing pattern that was specifically calibrated to cause disorientation in Corvani nervous systems. The second team found that the air recycling fans in Section D-12 had been adjusted to produce a subsonic frequency that interfered with Zelthran communication implants. The third team learned that Maintenance Section 9 had been rigged with motion sensors connected to the station's public address system, which began playing human military marches at full volume whenever the sensors detected non-human movement patterns. None of these measures were harmful in themselves, but they served Marcus's purpose perfectly. The aliens were beginning to understand that they weren't just hunting a sniper. They were engaging with an opponent who had intimate knowledge of every system on the station and the creativity to use that knowledge in unexpected ways. Marcus himself was 3 levels away when the search teams were discovering his surprises, using access tunnels that weren't on any official station schematic. One of the advantages of being part of the original construction crew was knowing about all the unofficial modifications that had been made during the building process. The station's official blueprints showed a sterile, regulation-compliant structure. The reality was a maze of shortcuts, hidden passages, and jury-rigged systems that only the humans who had built the place truly understood. He was currently positioned in what had once been an emergency supply cache, a small chamber hidden behind a false wall in the civilian quarters. The space was cramped, but provided access to a fiber optic cable that tapped directly into the station's main communication grid. Marcus could monitor all alien communications without leaving any trace of his presence. What he heard was both encouraging and concerning. The aliens were frustrated, but they weren't panicking. Commander Vex was methodically working through the problem like a professional intelligence officer, while Analytic Unit Zaith-7 was approaching it as a technical challenge to be solved through systematic analysis. Huntmaster Gorth brought a different perspective, treating the hunt as a test of skill against a worthy opponent. The human operative displays exceptional knowledge of station systems. Zaith-7 was reporting to the Joint Command. Preliminary analysis suggests involvement in original construction or maintenance operations. Recommend focus on personnel records from facility establishment period. Marcus smiled grimly at that. The aliens were thinking in the right direction, but personnel records wouldn't help them. According to official documentation, Sergeant Marcus Chun had been killed in action during the defense of Kepler Station. His body had supposedly been vaporized along with a section of the defensive perimeter when a Rock 3 missile had struck his position. The paperwork was all in order, complete with witness statements and DNA confirmation from blood samples Marcus had planted at the scene. Target demonstrates advanced tactical thinking, Commander Vex added. Initial strikes were designed to maximize psychological impact while minimizing direct engagement. This suggests professional military training with emphasis on asymmetric warfare tactics. The praise shows cunning. Huntmaster Gorth growled in the distinctive Rock 3 dialect. It uses our strength against us, turns our unity into discord. This is not mere soldier. This is hunter who thinks like Rock 3 warrior. Marcus found that last comment particularly amusing. The Rock 3 prided themselves on being the galaxy's greatest hunters, but they had always relied on superior senses and traditional tracking methods. They weren't prepared for an opponent who could manipulate technology and infrastructure as part of the hunt. The aliens were making progress, though. Over the next several hours, they eliminated dozens of potential hiding places and began developing countermeasures for Marcus's technological tricks. They brought in specialized equipment to detect human life signs, installed their own monitoring devices in critical areas, and began posting guards at key access points. Marcus let them work. Every hour they spent hunting him was an hour they weren't consolidating their control over the station or preparing for the next phase of their invasion into human space. More importantly, their joint operation was providing him with detailed intelligence about their capabilities, equipment, and operational procedures. That intelligence was already paying dividends. Marcus had identified several critical vulnerabilities in their security arrangements and was preparing to exploit them in ways that would make his previous efforts look like practice exercises. The opportunity came when the search teams finally located his primary sniper nest in the communications tower. Marcus watched through his surveillance tap as a joint team climbed carefully through the twisted metal beams where he had spent his first 3 days on the station. Commander Vex examined Marcus's abandoned position with professional appreciation. Excellent field of view, multiple escape routes, minimal exposure to counter-sniper fire. This operative has substantial experience. Residual heat signatures indicate position was occupied for extended period. Zaith-7 added, running scanners over the area. Estimate minimum 72 hours continuous occupation. Huntmaster Gorth was examining the makeshift camouflage Marcus had constructed from station debris. Human shows patience. Waited long time, watched, learned our ways before striking. This is wisdom of true hunter. Marcus was flattered, but he was also disappointed. The aliens were focused on his sniper nest because it represented conventional thinking: find a shooter's position, analyze the shooting angles, predict the next attack. What they hadn't yet realized was that Marcus had no intention of repeating his previous tactics. While they searched the communications tower, Marcus was implementing the next phase of his plan. He had spent 2 days rigging the station's cargo handling systems with a series of mechanical delays and redirections. The result was a complex chain reaction that wouldn't begin for another 6 hours, but would have dramatic consequences when it did. The aliens had brought substantial supplies with them for the occupation: food, equipment, spare parts, everything needed to establish a permanent presence on Kepler Station. Those supplies were stored in the main cargo bays using automated handling systems that Marcus had helped design and install. At exactly 1800-hour station time, a cascade of random malfunctions would begin redirecting cargo containers throughout the station. Corvani supplies would end up in Zelfrin storage areas. Rock 3 equipment would be delivered to Corvani personnel. Zelfrin technical components would find their way into Rock 3 territory. The beauty of the plan was that each individual malfunction would appear to be a simple technical glitch, the kind of minor problem that any complex automated system might develop over time. The aliens would initially assume that human technology was simply less reliable than their own advanced systems. By the time they realized the malfunctions were deliberate and coordinated, the damage to their logistics and intergroup trust would be substantial. But Marcus wasn't finished with his preparations. While the aliens continued their methodical search of the station's obvious sniper positions, he was preparing a demonstration that would show them exactly what kind of opponent they were facing. The lesson would begin in approximately 4 hours, when the evening shift change brought a temporary reduction in security coverage. Marcus had identified a 15-minute window when the alien search patterns would create a gap in their surveillance grid, a gap just large enough for a single human to move from his current position to the station's central computer core. The core was located in the most secure part of the station, protected by multiple layers of automated defenses and constantly monitored by all 3 alien powers. It was also the one location where Marcus could access every system on Kepler Station simultaneously. The aliens expected to find a sniper hiding in the shadows, taking potshots at their patrols and running away. What they were about to discover was that Marcus Chun had never been content with simple harassment. He had been planning something much more ambitious. Marcus checked his equipment one final time and began the careful process of moving through the hidden passages that would take him to the computer core. The aliens were about to learn that controlling human technology required more than just occupying human facilities. They were about to learn that some systems only truly responded to human commands, and that Marcus had every intention of reminding them who had built Kepler Station in the first place. Behind him, the search teams continued their methodical hunt through the maintenance areas, following protocols that would have been effective against any conventional opponent. But Marcus Chun had stopped being conventional the moment he chose to stay behind when everyone else evacuated. The hunt was indeed beginning, but the aliens were about to discover that they weren't the hunters in this equation. They were the prey, and the predators stalking them knew every inch of the territory they were trying to claim. The real lesson in human ingenuity was about to begin. Marcus reached the central computer core at exactly 2,247 hours, slipping through the final security checkpoint while the alien guards were dealing with what appeared to be a malfunctioning environmental sensor 3 levels away. The malfunction was, of course, one of Marcus's gifts, a simple timer device that released a small amount of harmless vapor designed to trigger atmospheric warnings in all 3 alien sensor systems simultaneously. The core chamber was a cathedral of human engineering, with processing nodes rising like metal trees toward the vaulted ceiling. Streams of data flowed through fiber optic cables like rivers of light, carrying the electronic heartbeat of a station that had once been humanity's crown jewel in deep space. The aliens had established monitoring stations around the chamber's perimeter, but they were focused on external threats, not someone emerging from the maintenance crawlways that honeycombed the walls. Marcus connected his portable interface to the primary access node and began the delicate process of awakening systems that had been dormant since the evacuation. The aliens had assumed that they controlled Kepler Station because they occupied its physical spaces, but they had never understood that the station itself was as much a character in this story as any of the people who lived there. Human technology had always been different from that of the galaxy's major powers. The Corvani built for durability and tradition. The Zelthrans created for efficiency and logic. The Rockthri preferred simplicity and reliability. Humans built for adaptability, with layers of redundancy and backup systems that could be reconfigured in ways the original designers had never imagined. Marcus's fingers moved across the interface with the fluid motion of someone who had spent years learning every quirk and capability of Kepler Station's central systems. He wasn't just accessing the computer core. He was having a conversation with an old friend. The first priority was establishing communication with human forces beyond the station. The aliens had cut all official communication links, but they had missed the emergency beacon system that was hardwired into the station's power grid. The beacon was designed to activate only in the event of complete system failure, sending a coded message on frequencies that would appear to be random electromagnetic noise to anyone who didn't know the encryption keys. Marcus uploaded a complete intelligence report on alien positions, capabilities, and weaknesses, along with detailed specifications of their weapons and defensive systems. The information would reach human military intelligence within hours, providing them with everything they needed to plan an effective response to the occupation. But intelligence gathering was only part of Marcus's mission. The real prize was what he was about to do to the aliens' carefully laid plans for expansion into human space. Over the past week, while the aliens had been congratulating themselves on their successful occupation, they had been using Kepler Station's communication systems to coordinate with their respective fleets. Military orders, supply requisitions, territorial assignments, all of it had been flowing through systems that Marcus understood better than their own operators. Marcus had been passively monitoring these communications since his first day in hiding, building a comprehensive picture of the three-way alliance's strategic intentions. What he had discovered was both alarming and encouraging. Alarming because the aliens were planning a rapid expansion that would overrun a dozen human colonies within the next month. Encouraging because their entire strategy depended on the assumption that Kepler Station would remain a secure operational base. That assumption was about to be tested. Marcus began implementing what he privately called the Prometheus Protocol, a cascading series of system failures and security breaches that would transform the aliens' greatest asset into their worst liability. The beauty of the protocol was that each individual component appeared to be an unrelated technical problem, but together they would create a situation that no amount of alien technology could fix quickly. The first stage targeted the life support systems. Not to kill anyone. Marcus wasn't interested in mass casualties, but to create a constant series of minor emergencies that would consume enormous amounts of time and resources. Temperature fluctuations that triggered environmental alarms. Atmospheric processors that occasionally introduced harmless, but detectable trace gases that suggested possible contamination. Water recycling systems that functioned perfectly, but produced readings that indicated potential biological hazards. None of these problems were dangerous, but they would force the aliens to treat every minor anomaly as a potential threat to their occupation force. The second stage focused on logistics and communication. Marcus introduced subtle delays and redirections into the automated systems that managed everything from food distribution to equipment maintenance. Supply shipments would arrive at wrong destinations. Equipment requests would be processed with minor but critical errors. Communication messages would experience random delays that suggested possible interception or tampering. Again, None of these problems were individually catastrophic, but they would create a constant background of inefficiency and suspicion that would strain the already fragile alliance between the three powers. The third stage was the most ambitious. Marcus had identified the central weakness in the aliens' operational security. They were using human-built communication systems to coordinate between their different forces, but they didn't really understand how those systems worked. They had simply connected their own equipment to existing infrastructure and assumed that encryption and authentication protocols would protect them. Marcus had other ideas. Working through the night, he carefully inserted monitoring and redirection protocols into the communication streams between the three alien commands. The aliens would continue to receive all legitimate communications, but Marcus would also be able to intercept, analyze, and, when necessary, modify those messages in ways that would gradually increase tensions between the supposedly allied forces. A Corvani request for additional security personnel would be modified to suggest that they were planning to expand beyond their agreed territorial boundaries. A Zelfrin technical report would be subtly altered to imply criticism of Rock 3 competence. A Rock 3 logistics update would be edited to suggest they were hoarding resources that should be shared with their allies. The changes would be minimal and subtle, easily explained as translation errors or communication glitches. But, over time, they would poison the trust between the three powers and recreate the same kind of mutual suspicion that Marcus had achieved with his sniper attacks. As dawn approached, Marcus made his final preparations. The Prometheus protocol was now fully operational, running through automated subroutines that would continue functioning even if Marcus himself was discovered and eliminated. The system failures would begin within hours, the communication intercepts were already active, and the logistics disruptions would start affecting operations before the end of the day. But Marcus wasn't finished. His final gift to the occupation force was a demonstration of exactly what it meant to underestimate human ingenuity. At exactly 0600 hours, every display screen on Kepler station simultaneously activated with the same message. The aliens carefully secured communication networks, their isolated computer systems, even their portable devices. Everything with a visual display showed the same image. It was a photograph of Marcus Chun, taken just moments before in the central computer core. He was smiling calmly at the camera, his sniper rifle visible in the background, his hands resting confidently on the interface console that controlled the station's primary systems. Below the image was a simple message in the trade language that all three alien powers use for interspecies communication. Kepler station remains under human control. Departure recommended. The message remained on every screen for exactly 60 seconds, then vanished as if it had never existed. But Marcus knew that the psychological impact would last much longer. The aliens had spent a week believing they controlled the station, only to discover that a single human had been watching their every move and manipulating their operations from the shadows. More importantly, the demonstration proved that their supposedly secure systems were completely compromised. Every order they had sent, every plan they had made, every communication between their forces, all of it had been accessible to someone who understood human technology better than they did. Marcus gathered his equipment and began the journey back to his hiding places. The aliens would respond to his demonstration with overwhelming force, flooding the station with search teams and implementing security protocols that would make further operations much more difficult. But they were already too late. The intelligence report was on its way to human military command. The Prometheus protocol was running autonomously through systems the aliens couldn't safely shut down without crippling their own operations. And, most importantly, the galaxy was about to learn that humanity's retreat from Kepler station had been strategic rather than final. Marcus spoke into his personal recorder one last time as he disappeared into the maze of maintenance tunnels that the aliens were only beginning to understand. Day 7, 0630 hours. Mission parameters exceeded. Kepler station remains contested territory. Human intelligence assets confirmed operational. Enemy morale and operational efficiency significantly degraded. He paused, listening to the sounds of alarm klaxons echoing through the station as the aliens scrambled to respond to his demonstration. Personal note: Admiral Morrison was right to save 30,000 lives through strategic withdrawal. But the war isn't over, and humanity isn't finished fighting. Sometimes retreat is just another way of advancing to a better position. Above him, Marcus could hear the sound of heavy boots as alien search teams began flooding the areas around the computer core. They would find evidence of his presence, but Marcus would be long gone by then, moving through passages that existed only in the memories of the humans who had built this place. The hunt would continue, but the balance had shifted. The aliens had come to Kepler Station expecting to find an abandoned human colony ripe for occupation. Instead, they had discovered that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their military forces. It was their absolute refusal to accept defeat. Marcus Chun disappeared into the depths of Kepler Station, but his presence would be felt for weeks to come. Every system malfunction would remind the aliens that they were unwelcome guests in a human home. Every communication intercept would demonstrate that their security was an illusion. Every day they remained would cost them more resources, more trust, and more confidence in their ability to control human space. The galaxy had mocked humanity's retreat from Kepler Station, but the laughter was about to stop. Because somewhere in the shadows of their greatest prize, a human sniper was still there, still fighting, and still proving that humanity had never really surrendered at all. They had just been reloading,